Little girl draws a fridge on her wall. It's always full. A disguised millionaire is shocked. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and type "love" in the comments. A beautiful piece of good news may come your way very soon. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. The rain hammered against the windshield as Benjamin Carson sat in his modest rental car, staring at the weathered address scrawled on a crumpled piece of paper. 37 Maple Street. The house before him was a far cry from his penthouse suite overlooking Manhattan's skyline. Peeling paint, a sagging front porch, and a chain-link fence that had seen better days painted a picture of struggle that made his chest tighten uncomfortably. He adjusted his thrift store jacket and worn baseball cap, ensuring his disguise remained intact. For 3 months, Ben had been conducting these visits under the pretense of being a social researcher, studying low-income families. The real reason was far more personal and infinitely more painful. He was searching for traces of his brother David, who had vanished from his life 8 years ago after a bitter argument that still haunted Ben's dreams. The breakthrough had come 2 weeks ago when his private investigator finally traced David's death certificate. The document revealed that David Carson had legally changed his name to David Thompson after marrying Rachel, taking his wife's surname, an unusual choice that had made tracking him nearly impossible. Hospital records and employment documents had led them here, to this forgotten corner of Ohio, where David had lived his final years in anonymity. Ben's throat constricted at the memory of receiving that devastating phone call. His little brother, dead at 28 from a heart defect, alone and estranged from the only family he had left. The investigator had been blunt. "Your brother worked 3 jobs to support his family, died of exhaustion as much as heart failure." Taking a steadying breath, Ben stepped out of the car and walked toward the front door. His Armani shoes, carefully scuffed to look worn, splashed through puddles that reflected the grey December sky. The porch creaked under his weight as he knocked 3 times, the sound echoing hollowly in the cold air. Footsteps approached from inside, quick and light. The door opened to reveal a woman in her mid-30s with tired eyes and prematurely graying brown hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Despite the exhaustion etched into her features, she possessed a gentle beauty that spoke of inner strength forged through hardship. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice cautious but not unfriendly. She wore scrubs decorated with cartoon characters, suggesting she worked in healthcare, probably coming off a long shift. "Ms. Rachel Thompson?" Ben consulted his clipboard, maintaining his researched persona. "I'm Dr. Michael Stevens from the Urban Family Studies Institute. We spoke on the phone about participating in our community support research." Recognition dawned in her eyes, followed by a flicker of hope. "Oh yes, of course. Please, come in. I'm sorry about the mess. I just got home from work and—" She trailed off, stepping aside to let him enter. The interior of the house was small but spotlessly clean, despite Rachel's apologetic words. The furniture was mismatched but arranged with care, and handmade decorations added warmth to the modest space. The scent of vanilla candles couldn't quite mask the lingering aroma of instant coffee and microwave dinners. "Chloe, honey, we have a visitor," Rachel called toward the back of the house. "Can you come say hello?" Light footsteps pattered across the wooden floor, and Ben's breath caught as a small figure appeared in the doorway. The little girl was perhaps 8 years old, with golden blonde hair that caught the lamplight like spun silk and eyes the color of summer sky. She wore a faded Disney princess dress that had clearly been loved and washed many times, and she clutched a well-worn stuffed rabbit against her chest. But it was her smile that stopped Ben's heart, bright, trusting, and achingly familiar. It was David's smile, the same impish grin that had gotten his little brother out of trouble countless times during their childhood. "Hello," Chloe said softly, suddenly shy in the presence of a stranger. She partially hid behind her mother's legs while peeking out at Ben with curious eyes. "Well, hello there, beautiful," Ben said, his voice surprisingly gentle, as he crouched down to her level. The endearment came naturally, though it stirred something painful in his chest. "What's your rabbit's name?" Chloe's face brightened instantly. "This is Mr. Hopscotch. Daddy gave him to me before." She paused, her small brow furrowing as she glanced up at her mother. Rachel's hand moved protectively to her daughter's shoulder, and Ben noticed the slight tremor in her fingers. "Before he went to heaven," Rachel finished softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hit Ben like a physical blow. His suspicions were crystallizing into devastating reality with each passing moment. The resemblance, the timeline, the location, it all pointed to the conclusion he both hoped for and dreaded. "I'm very sorry for your loss," Ben managed, his professional facade wavering slightly. "How long ago did that happen?" 2 years, Rachel replied, gathering Chloe closer to her side. Chloe was only 6. She doesn't remember him as well as I'd like, but she treasures everything he gave her. Chloe nodded solemnly, then suddenly perked up with the resilient enthusiasm that only children possess. "Would you like to see my room? I drew pictures on the wall. Mommy said it was okay because we can't afford wallpaper anyway." Rachel's cheeks flushed pink. "Chloe, honey, maybe Dr. Stevens doesn't have time." "Actually, I'd love to see your artwork," Ben interjected, his heart racing. Every instinct told him he was on the verge of a discovery that would change everything. "Lead the way, sweetheart." Chloe beamed and took his large hand in her tiny one, her trust immediate and complete. As she pulled him toward her bedroom, Ben caught Rachel's grateful smile. She followed behind them, her footsteps soft on the worn carpet. The little girl's room was a testament to creativity born from necessity. The walls were covered with drawings in crayon, marker and colored pencil. Flowers, rainbows, stick figure families, and fantastical creatures that existed only in a child's imagination. Handmade curtains from clearance fabric framed a small window, and books from the library were stacked neatly on a wooden crate that served as a nightstand. But it was the drawing on the wall opposite her bed that made Ben's knees weak. There, rendered in careful detail despite the medium's limitations, was a refrigerator. But this wasn't the compact, half-empty appliance he'd glimpsed in the kitchen. This refrigerator was magnificent, tall, gleaming silver, with both doors thrown wide open to reveal shelves packed with every imaginable food. Fruits and vegetables in vibrant colors, packages of meat, gallons of milk, blocks of cheese, and treats that would make any child's mouth water. At the bottom, a small stick-figure girl with yellow hair stood beside it, arms spread wide as if embracing the abundance. Chloe positioned herself proudly in front of her masterpiece, Mr. Hopscotch still clutched in one arm. "This is my dream fridge," she announced with the matter-of-fact seriousness that children brought to their most important revelations. "See, it's always full." The simple words, spoken with such innocent hope, shattered something inside Ben's chest. He knelt beside her, his throat tight with emotion he couldn't quite name. "It's beautiful, Chloe. Tell me about it." Her face lit up as she pointed to different sections of the drawing. "That's where we'd keep the ice cream. 3 whole flavors. And look, there's a whole drawer just for apples. Mommy loves apples, but they cost too much at the store sometimes. And see this part?" She indicated the bottom shelves with reverent excitement. "That's where I'd put snacks for when friends come over, if I had friends over." Rachel's sharp intake of breath from the doorway was barely audible, but Ben caught it. He turned to see tears threatening to spill from her eyes. Her hand pressed to her mouth as if to hold back words that might break her daughter's innocent joy. "What else would you put in there?" Ben asked gently, his focus returning to Chloe. "Well," she said thoughtfully, tapping her small finger against her chin, "maybe some of those fancy yogurts with the fruit on the bottom. And definitely string cheese, lots of it. Oh, and those juice boxes that don't need the refrigerator but taste better cold. She paused, her expression growing wistful. Mommy works really hard, but the real fridge doesn't stay full very long. So I draw this one because Mommy says dreams don't cost anything. The last sentence was barely a whisper, but it echoed in Ben's mind like a thunderclap. He struggled to maintain his composure as the full weight of what he was witnessing crashed over him. This wasn't just about hunger or poverty. It was about a child who had learned to find hope in imagination because reality offered so little. "Your mommy is very wise," Ben managed, his voice hoarse with suppressed emotion. "And you're an incredibly talented artist." Chloe beamed at the praise, then suddenly grabbed his hand again. "Come see the kitchen. Maybe you can help Mommy figure out how to make the real fridge like my drawing." As she tugged him toward the doorway, Ben caught Rachel's eye. The look that passed between them was filled with unspoken understanding, the recognition that this man, this stranger, had just witnessed their most vulnerable truth. Rachel's chin lifted with quiet dignity, but her eyes held a plea he recognized. "Please don't judge us. Please don't take away what little we have." In that moment, Benjamin Carson felt something crack inside his chest, not breaking him, but creating space for something he'd forgotten how to feel. But first, he needed to confirm what his heart already suspected with growing certainty. "Chloe," he said gently, stopping in the hallway, "can you tell me something about your daddy?" What was his name? The little girl's expression grew thoughtful, and she glanced at her mother for reassurance before answering. His name was David. Daddy, David Thompson. But Mommy has pictures where his name used to be different before they got married and he changed it to match ours. Ben's world tilted on its axis. David had taken Rachel's name, probably to distance himself from his family, from Ben himself. The realization that his brother had been so close, had built a life and had a daughter, and had died believing Ben didn't care enough to find him, was almost unbearable. "What was his name before?" Ben whispered, though he already knew the answer. "Carson," Chloe said proudly. "David Carson. Mommy says I have his smile and his laugh and his eyes too. Do you think so?" Ben couldn't speak. He could only nod as the truth he'd been searching for finally, devastatingly, beautifully revealed itself. The familiar smile, the creative spirit, the way she tilted her head when thinking she was David's daughter in every gesture. He had found his brother's daughter, his niece, his family, and she was drawing refrigerators full of food on her bedroom wall because dreams don't cost anything. The kitchen confirmed what Ben's breaking heart already knew. The refrigerator was a compact model, probably purchased second-hand years ago, with its white surface yellowed by age and wear. Through its clear plastic drawers, he could see the sparse contents. A half-gallon of milk nearing its expiration date, some wilted lettuce, a few eggs, and condiments that could stretch to make any meal more palatable. Rachel busied herself making coffee, her movements economical and practiced. "I'm sorry I don't have much to offer. Coffee's instant, but it's adequate." She managed a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Please sit down. Chloe, honey, why don't you show Dr. Stevens your other drawings while I get everything ready?" Chloe needed no further encouragement. She bounded to a small table and returned with a shoebox filled with artwork, sheets of paper covered with the same hopeful imagery that adorned her bedroom walls. Houses with impossibly green lawns, families holding hands under bright yellow suns, and more food than any child should have to fantasize about. "This one's my favorite," she said, pulling out a drawing of what appeared to be a grocery store. But in Chloe's imagination, it was Wonderland. The shelves towered toward the sky, packed with colorful packages and fresh produce. Stick figures with enormous smiles pushed carts overflowing with treasures. "Someday, Mommy and I are going to go shopping here, and we're going to fill up a whole cart." Ben studied the drawing, noting the careful attention to detail despite her young age. She'd even drawn price tags on some items, though the numbers were fantastical: apples for 1 penny, milk for a nickel. Her concept of money was clearly limited, but her understanding of want versus need was heartbreakingly sophisticated. "You really love to draw," he observed, accepting the steaming mug Rachel offered him. "Daddy taught me," Chloe said matter-of-factly. "Before he got sick, he used to draw with me every day. He said I had magic hands because I could make anything appear on paper." She held up her small hands, examining them with the seriousness of someone much older. "I don't think they're really magic, but I like to pretend sometimes." Rachel's cup rattled slightly against its saucer as she set it down. David was. He was very artistic, always encouraging her creativity, even when money was tight. She paused, her gaze distant, especially when money was tight. "Tell me about him," Ben said gently, his cover story momentarily forgotten. "For the research, of course. Understanding family dynamics is important for our study." Rachel's expression softened, and for the first time since he'd arrived, she looked younger, less burdened. David was special, different from anyone I'd ever met. He had this way of finding joy in the smallest things and sharing it with everyone around him. When Chloe was born, he cried for 20 minutes straight, just holding her and whispering about all the adventures they'd have together. Chloe nodded enthusiastically. "Mommy, tell him about the treasure hunts." "Oh my goodness, the treasure hunts." Rachel's laugh was genuine now, transforming her entire face. David would hide little notes around the apartment. Simple things for Chloe to find. Look under the couch cushion for a hug. Check the cookie jar for a kiss. She'd spend hours following the clues, and the treasure was always something free. A piggyback ride, a story, time spent together. Ben's throat constricted. This was exactly the kind of thing David would do. Growing up, his little brother had been endlessly inventive when it came to making ordinary moments magical. He'd once convinced 10-year-old Ben that the cardboard box their new television came in was actually a spaceship capable of traveling to any planet they could imagine. "He sounds like a wonderful father," Ben managed, struggling with conflicting emotions. "The best," Chloe chimed in. Then her expression grew puzzled. "But sometimes Daddy would get really sad. He'd look at old pictures on his phone and cry, but he wouldn't tell me why. Mommy said he missed his family." The words hit Ben like physical blows. His brother had been looking at pictures, probably old family photos from before their estrangement, and crying while his daughter watched, not understanding why her daddy was in pain. Rachel quickly intervened, recognizing the sensitive territory they'd entered. "Chloe, sweetheart, why don't you go wash your hands? Dinner will be ready soon, and maybe Dr. Stevens would like to stay and eat with us." "Oh, I couldn't impose," Ben began, but Chloe was already clapping her hands together with delight. "Please stay. We're having spaghetti. It's not fancy, but Mommy makes good sauce with what we have." As Chloe skipped toward the bathroom, Rachel's expression grew guarded again. She lowered her voice to barely above a whisper. "I should be honest with you, Dr. Stevens. I don't have a lot to offer for dinner. The spaghetti and sauce will stretch to feed 3 people, but there won't be much else. I'm not trying to make you feel sorry for us. I just want you to know what you're saying yes to." The quiet dignity in her admission made Ben's chest ache. She was proud. This young mother who worked multiple jobs to keep food on the table and a roof over her daughter's head. She wasn't asking for charity or pity. She was simply being transparent about their reality. "I'd be honored to share dinner with you and Chloe," Ben said sincerely. "And please don't worry about portions. I'm not very hungry anyway." It was a lie. He hadn't eaten since breakfast, but the thought of this small family sharing their limited resources with a stranger moved him beyond words. Rachel nodded gratefully and moved to the stove, where a dented pot was already bubbling with boiling water. She opened a box of generic spaghetti and carefully measured out portions, her movements precise from years of making every ingredient count. A small jar of sauce sat on the counter beside a can of tomatoes, their labels showing they'd been purchased with coupons. "Can I ask you something?" Ben said, watching her work, part of him desperate to understand, while another part dreaded the answer. "About David's family. You mentioned he missed them." Rachel paused, her hand hovering over the sauce jar. When she spoke, her voice carried old pain. David had a brother. Younger, I think, or maybe older. David was never clear about that. They had some kind of falling out years before I met him. David never told me the details, but I know it broke his heart. He used to say he'd ruined the only family relationship that mattered to him. Ben's hands clenched into fists beneath the table. Did he ever try to reach out? To fix things? Oh, he tried everything. Rachel's voice grew heavy with old sadness. Letters that came back unopened, emails that were blocked. He even hired someone to find his brother's address, but when he went there, security wouldn't let him in. David said his brother had become very successful, very important, and obviously didn't want anything to do with his past. Ben's blood ran cold. David had tried to visit him, had stood outside his corporate building, probably looking up at the gleaming tower that represented everything he'd achieved, while his brother struggled to survive. The last attempt was a phone call, Rachel continued, unaware of Ben's internal anguish. Chloe was 5, and David was so proud that she'd learned to write her name. He called his brother 3 times in one day, wanting to share the news. When the calls went to voicemail and then stopped going through at all. She paused, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. David never tried again after that. He said he finally understood that some bridges stay burned. Ben felt like he was drowning. The phone call he'd ignored, the number he'd blocked, it hadn't been about money or drama. David had wanted to share that his daughter could write her name. His brother had been proud and excited and had reached out to the one person who should have cared most, only to be met with electronic silence. "I'm sure his brother regrets whatever happened," Ben said quietly, his voice thick with emotion he couldn't quite hide. "Family estrangements. Sometimes people act out of hurt and pride, not realizing the damage they're causing." Rachel glanced at him curiously, perhaps picking up on the personal note in his voice, but Chloe's return interrupted any questions she might have asked. "Mommy, can Dr. Stevens see my photo album after dinner?" Chloe asked, climbing onto her chair with Mr. Hopscotch still tucked under one arm. "I want to show him pictures of Daddy." "Of course, sweetheart," Rachel replied, though Ben noticed her slight hesitation. "I'm sure Dr. Stevens would enjoy that." And as Rachel served dinner, Ben watched Chloe carefully divide her small portion of spaghetti into even smaller bites, making each mouthful last as long as possible. She chatted happily between bites, telling him about school, her teacher Mrs. Patterson, and her best friend who had moved away last month. "Sometimes I get sad about Daddy not being here," she said with the startling honesty of childhood. "But Mommy says he's always with us in our hearts, and when I draw pictures, I pretend he's helping me, like he used to." Ben had to look away, blinking rapidly to prevent tears from falling. This child, his brother's daughter, was carrying on David's legacy of finding joy in impossible circumstances, just as David had done throughout their difficult childhood. "Your daddy would be very proud of you," Ben managed to say. Chloe's face lit up. "Really? How do you know?" "Because," Ben said, his voice steady with absolute conviction, "any father would be proud to have such a kind, creative, beautiful daughter." As they finished the simple meal, Ben wrestled with emotions he couldn't name. Tomorrow, he would have to decide what to do with this knowledge. Tonight, he needed to see those photographs and understand exactly what his pride had cost. Not just him, but David, Rachel, and most devastatingly, this innocent child who deserved to know she had family who cared about her. The photo album would hold the final pieces of the puzzle, and Ben was both desperate and terrified to see them. But first, he had to survive the guilt that was threatening to consume him from the inside out. After dinner, Chloe carefully retrieved a worn photo album from the living room shelf, handling it with the reverence reserved for precious treasures. The cover was decorated with stickers that had lost their adhesive, and several pages were held together with clear tape, but the love with which it was maintained was evident in every detail. "This is my daddy book," she announced solemnly, settling onto the couch beside Ben. Rachel sat on Chloe's other side, her hand resting protectively on her daughter's shoulder. "Mommy and I look at it every Sunday after church. It helps us remember all the happy times." The first page contained photos from what appeared to be David and Rachel's wedding day. It had clearly been a small, informal ceremony, but the joy on their faces was radiant. Ben's breath caught as he looked at his brother for the first time in 8 years. David looked older, thinner than Ben remembered, but his smile was exactly the same, wide and genuine and full of hope. "You were a beautiful bride," Ben told Rachel softly, noting how young she looked in the photos. She couldn't have been more than 25 at the time. "Thank you," she replied, her fingers absently stroking Chloe's hair. "It was the happiest day of my life up until Chloe was born. David had this way of making everything feel magical, even when we couldn't afford much." Chloe turned the page eagerly, revealing pregnancy photos and then pictures from the hospital. Ben's composure nearly cracked completely when he saw the first photo of David holding his newborn daughter. His brother's expression was one of pure, overwhelming love and wonder, the look of a man who had just discovered his entire purpose for existence. "Daddy couldn't stop taking pictures," Chloe giggled, pointing to a series of nearly identical shots of her as an infant. "Mommy says he took more pictures in my first week than some people take in a whole year." The pages chronicled Chloe's early years, first smiles, first steps, first words. In every single photograph that included David, he was completely focused on his daughter. Whether they were reading together, playing in a tiny backyard, or simply sitting on this same couch, his attention was entirely devoted to Chloe. But Ben also noticed what wasn't in the photos. Their clothing was always clean, but often worn. Toys were few and obviously cherished. Birthday parties were celebrated at home, with handmade decorations and simple cakes. It was clear that David and Rachel had poured all their love and creativity into giving Chloe a happy childhood, despite their financial limitations. "Tell me about this one," Ben said, pointing to a photo of David and 3-year-old Chloe at what appeared to be a park. Chloe's face lit up with the memory. "Oh, that was the day Daddy taught me to fly kites without a kite. See, we didn't have money for a real one, so Daddy tied some old plastic bags together with string, and we ran around the park pretending it was the most beautiful kite in the world. Other kids came to watch us, and pretty soon half the playground was flying imaginary kites too." Ben could picture the scene perfectly. David had always possessed the rare ability to transform disappointment into adventure, to make magic out of nothing. Apparently, fatherhood had only strengthened that gift. "Your daddy was very creative," Ben observed, his voice carefully controlled. "The most creative person ever," Chloe agreed enthusiastically. Then her expression grew more thoughtful. "Except sometimes he would get really quiet and sad. Especially on his birthday and Christmas. He would sit right here and look through old pictures on his phone, not the ones of me and Mommy, but other ones. Pictures of him and a boy who looked like him." Rachel's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on Chloe's shoulder. "Sweetheart, maybe Dr. Stevens doesn't need to hear about—" "No, it's okay," Ben interrupted gently, though his heart was hammering. "I'd like to understand David's full story. If that's all right with you both. Chloe nodded seriously. The boy in the pictures was younger than Daddy, I think. They were always playing together, building things, swimming, riding bikes. In some pictures, Daddy was helping the other boy with homework or tying his shoes. She paused, her brow furrowing with concentration. Mommy said Daddy had to take care of his little brother when they were kids because their mommy and Daddy went to heaven too early. Ben's world shifted completely. Every memory he'd carried, every assumption about their childhood, crumbled and reformed in an instant. David hadn't been the irresponsible little brother. David had been his protector, his caregiver, the one who made sure Ben had what he needed to survive their parents' absence. The little brother's name was Ben, Chloe continued innocently, unaware that she was rewriting history with every word. Daddy would stare at those pictures and cry, but he wouldn't tell me why. I asked Mommy once, and she said Daddy missed taking care of little Ben very much, and he worried about him all the time. The photo album slipped from Ben's suddenly numb fingers, landing with a soft thud on his lap. He could barely breathe, as 18 years of false narrative collapsed around him. David hadn't been his burden. David had been his salvation. The older brother, who'd sacrificed his own teenage years to ensure Ben graduated high school, got into college, had clean clothes and packed lunches, and someone to sign his report cards. Dr. Stevens. Rachel's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you all right?" Ben realized he was trembling. Chloe was looking up at him with concern, her small hand reaching out to touch his arm with the instinctive compassion children showed to adults in distress. I'm fine," he managed, though he was anything but. "Just moved by the story." "Your daddy sounds like he was a very good big brother." "The best," Chloe agreed. "He told me once that taking care of little Ben was the most important job he ever had, even more important than the jobs he did for money. He said little Ben grew up to be very successful, and Daddy was proud of him, even though they couldn't talk anymore." The innocence of her words was devastating. She had no idea that little Ben was sitting right beside her, that the person her father had loved and worried about and been proud of, despite their separation, was close enough to touch. "I wish I could have met little Ben," Chloe continued thoughtfully. "Maybe if he knew about me, he wouldn't have been mad at Daddy anymore. Maybe he would have liked me, and then Daddy wouldn't have been so sad." "I'm sure little Ben would have loved you very much," Ben whispered, his voice breaking. "You're impossible not to love, and any uncle would be lucky to have you." Chloe beamed at the compliment, then suddenly yawned. The excitement of having a visitor and staying up past her usual bedtime was catching up with her. "Time for bed, little one," Rachel said, closing the photo album gently. "Dr. Stevens has already been so kind to spend the evening with us." But I want to show him my Christmas drawings," Chloe protested, though another yawn undermined her argument. "How about this?" Ben suggested, his heart racing as he prepared to set tomorrow's revelation in motion. "What if I came back tomorrow? I could see your Christmas drawings then, and maybe we could talk more about your dreams and your daddy." Chloe's eyes widened with delight. "Really? You'd come back just to see me?" "I absolutely would," Ben promised, meaning every word. "In fact, I have a feeling tomorrow is going to be a very special day for all of us." Rachel looked puzzled by his words, but Chloe was already planning tomorrow's activities aloud. "I can show you all my art supplies, and we can look at more photos, and maybe you can help me draw a new picture for the wall." As Rachel carried her sleepy daughter to bed, Ben sat alone in the small living room, surrounded by evidence of the life his brother had built. A life filled with love, creativity, and quiet heroism despite overwhelming challenges. David had died protecting his family's dignity, working himself to exhaustion to provide for them, never knowing that little Ben had become wealthy enough to solve all their problems with a simple phone call. But more than that, David had died believing that the little brother he'd raised and protected had grown to hate him. The magnitude of that misunderstanding was staggering. Every memory Ben carried of feeling responsible for David was revealed as a self-constructed fiction. David had been the responsible one, the caregiver, the big brother who'd sacrificed everything to give Ben a future. Tomorrow, Ben would tell them the truth. He would reveal that little Ben had not only been found, but had been searching for them without knowing it. He would explain that Chloe's dreams didn't have to remain drawings on bedroom walls, and that David's worry about his little brother had been unnecessary. Little Ben had succeeded beyond imagination, but success meant nothing without family to share it. Tonight, though, he sat in the dim light of the living room where his brother had lived and loved and yearned for reconciliation, and he made a solemn vow. He would honor David's memory by becoming the uncle Chloe deserved, by caring for the family his brother had cherished above all else. He would ensure that this little girl who had inherited her father's creativity and hope would grow up knowing she was loved beyond measure by the uncle who had finally, devastatingly, found his way home. The photo album lay closed on the coffee table, but the images were burned into Ben's memory forever, along with the crushing realization that he had spent 8 years hating himself for being the irresponsible younger brother, when the truth was that he had been the beloved little brother whose big brother had never stopped loving him, worrying about him, or hoping for reconciliation. Tomorrow would bring revelations that would change 3 lives forever. Tonight, he simply sat in his brother's home and mourned not just the years they had lost, but the fundamental misunderstanding that had poisoned every memory he'd carried of their relationship. Outside, the rain had stopped, and stars were beginning to appear between the breaking clouds, a sign, perhaps, that the darkness was finally giving way to truth. Ben spent the night in a modest motel 10 miles away, but sleep eluded him entirely. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Chloe's innocent face as she talked about little Ben, heard her small voice saying, "Daddy missed taking care of little Ben very much." The weight of revelation pressed down on his chest like a physical force, making breathing difficult. But along with the devastation came something else, a gnawing uncertainty that kept him pacing the small room until dawn. What right did he have to walk back into their lives and turn everything upside down? What if revealing his identity brought them more pain than comfort? What if Rachel refused to believe him, or worse, what if she believed him and felt obligated to accept help she didn't want? By morning, his phone was buzzing with missed calls from his assistant and board members expecting him in Manhattan for crucial meetings. For the first time in his adult life, Ben stared at his phone and felt nothing but emptiness at the thought of conference rooms and profit margins. He cancelled the morning meetings but hesitated over the afternoon ones. Maybe he should fly back to New York, process this information, figure out the right approach. Maybe he should hire lawyers, social workers, professionals who could handle this delicate situation properly. But then he remembered Chloe's trusting smile and the way she'd said, "You'd come back just to see me?" And he knew he couldn't leave. Not yet. Not without at least trying to honor the promise he'd made to a little girl who'd already experienced too much disappointment. At exactly 9 o'clock, he stood once again on the sagging porch of 37 Maple Street, his heart hammering against his ribs. This time, however, he'd traded his disguise for one of his expensive suits, though he'd chosen the most conservative one he owned. The transformation from Dr. Stevens to Benjamin Carson felt both necessary and terrifying. When Rachel opened the door, her confusion was immediate and evident. She looked him up and down, taking in the dramatic change in his appearance, her protective instincts clearly activated. "Dr. Stevens, you look so different today. Is everything all right?" Her voice carried a note of suspicion now, as if she sensed that yesterday's researcher had been replaced by someone potentially dangerous to her careful equilibrium. "May I come in, Rachel? There's something important I need to tell you and Chloe. Something that's going to sound impossible at first." The serious tone of his voice made her step back, but he could see her calculating, weighing the risk of letting him in against her daughter's obvious affection for the man she'd known as Dr. Stevens. Chloe came running from her bedroom, still in her pajamas, her blonde hair tousled from sleep. When she saw Ben, her face lit up with pure joy, then quickly shifted to confusion. "Dr. Stevens, why are you wearing fancy clothes? Are you going to a wedding or something?" Ben knelt down to her level, his throat tight with emotion and nerves. "Chloe, sweetheart, I need to talk to you and your mommy about something very important. Can we sit down together like we did last night?" Something in his tone must have communicated the gravity of the moment, because both Rachel and Chloe became still and attentive. They settled on the couch, Chloe clutching Mr. Hopscotch and instinctively leaning into her mother's protective embrace. Ben remained standing, needing the movement to manage his nervous energy. "First, I need to apologize for not being completely honest with you yesterday. I'm not Dr. Stevens from any research institute." He paused, watching Rachel's expression shift from confusion to alarm. "My name is Benjamin Carson. I'm a businessman from New York, and I came here because I've been searching for someone very important to me." Rachel's face went pale. "Searching for who?" "My brother," Ben said quietly, his voice breaking slightly on the words. "David Carson. The brother I lost touch with 8 years ago and have regretted it every single day since." The silence that followed was deafening. Chloe looked between her mother and Ben with wide, uncertain eyes, while Rachel's hand moved protectively to her daughter's back. "That's—" Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. "That's not possible. David's brother was younger than him. David took care of him." "Yes," Ben said, his voice heavy with newfound understanding. "He did. I spent years believing I was the older brother, the responsible one. But last night, listening to Chloe's stories, I realized I had it backwards. David was my big brother. He took care of me after our parents died, and I was too proud and too stupid to remember that correctly." Rachel stared at him, her mind clearly racing. "David said his brother became successful, very successful." "I did," Ben admitted, "but success means nothing when you've lost the person who made it possible in the first place." Chloe's small voice cut through the tension. "Are you little Ben, the one Daddy took care of?" Ben's knees nearly gave way. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm little Ben, all grown up. And your daddy never stopped loving me, even when I was too foolish to return his calls." The words hung in the air like a confession. Chloe stared at him with those achingly familiar blue eyes, processing this information with the serious concentration she brought to all important matters. "Daddy cried about you," she said matter-of-factly, and each word hit Ben like a physical blow. "He said he worried that little Ben might need him and wouldn't know how to ask for help." Rachel had remained silent, her face cycling through emotions too complex to name. When she finally spoke, her voice was tight with years of witnessed pain. "If you're really David's brother, then you know he tried to contact you. Multiple times." Ben closed his eyes. "The phone calls 3 years ago. I was in business meetings. I thought—" He opened his eyes, meeting Rachel's gaze directly. "I thought he wanted money. I was arrogant and cruel, and I blocked his number without even listening to the voicemails." "He wasn't calling for money," Rachel said quietly, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. "He was calling because Chloe had learned to write her name, and he was so proud he wanted to share it with the only family he had left." The devastating simplicity of it, his brother had called to share joy, not to ask for help, broke something fundamental inside Ben's chest. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with the weight of regret. Small arms wrapped around his neck suddenly, and Chloe's sweet voice whispered in his ear, "Don't cry, Uncle Ben. Daddy's not sad anymore because you found us, and I'm not sad anymore because I finally got to meet you." The pure, uncomplicated forgiveness in her embrace was almost too much to bear. Ben hugged her back gently, amazed by her instinctive compassion. "I want to take care of you and your mommy," he whispered into her hair. "I want to make sure you never have to worry about empty refrigerators or whether there's enough money for apples." Chloe pulled back to look at him seriously. "Are you really rich, Uncle Ben?" Rachel gasped softly, embarrassed by her daughter's directness, but Ben managed a watery smile. "Very rich, sweetheart. Rich enough to make sure you and your mommy never have to worry about money again." "Really?" Chloe's eyes widened with wonder, then suddenly narrowed with the wariness of someone who'd learned not to trust promises that seemed too good to be true. "But what if you change your mind? What if you decide we're too much trouble and go back to New York?" The question revealed a wisdom and protectiveness that no 8-year-old should have to carry. Ben realized she'd learned to guard not just her own heart, but her mother's as well. "I'm never going to change my mind about loving you," Ben said firmly. "But I also don't want to rush into anything that would make you or your mommy uncomfortable. We can take this as slowly as you need." Rachel had been quiet through this exchange, clearly struggling with the magnitude of what was being offered. Finally she spoke, her voice carefully controlled. "Mr. Carson, I appreciate what you're saying, but I need you to understand something. Chloe and I have built a life here. It's not easy, and it's not luxurious, but it's ours. We have routines, and she has school, and I have jobs. We can't just uproot everything because someone shows up claiming to be family." Ben finished gently. "You're absolutely right to be cautious, Rachel. You've protected Chloe beautifully, and you don't know me from anyone. What can I do to prove to you that I'm who I say I am?" "I have pictures," Rachel said slowly. "David kept a few photos from before you two lost touch. If you're really his brother." She disappeared into her bedroom and returned with a small envelope. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out 3 photographs, examining them carefully before handing them to Ben. The first photo nearly destroyed him. It showed teenage David, with his arm around a lanky 15-year-old Ben at what appeared to be Ben's high school graduation. David's pride in his little brother's achievement was evident in every line of his face. The second photo was from Christmas morning, David watching with satisfaction as Ben opened a present, a calculator for his college engineering courses, probably representing weeks of David's careful saving. The third photo was the most devastating of all. It showed David helping Ben pack for college, both of them trying to smile despite the obvious emotion of the moment. Ben remembered that day now with crystal clarity. How David had slipped an envelope of cash into his suitcase when he thought Ben wasn't looking, how he'd made Ben promise to call if he needed anything at all. "That's me," Ben whispered, his voice barely audible. "That's us." Rachel studied his face carefully, comparing it to the teenager in the photographs. Finally, she nodded slowly. "You have the same eyes. And the way you hold your shoulders when you're nervous. David did that too when he was worried about something important." Mommy," Chloe interrupted softly, "remember what you always tell me, that sometimes God sends angels when we need them most." She looked between her mother and Ben with startling wisdom. "Maybe Uncle Ben is one of our angels." The simple faith in her words hung in the air between them. Rachel looked at her daughter, then at Ben, then back at the photographs that proved beyond doubt that this man was indeed David's little brother, all grown up and searching for family he'd lost through pride and misunderstanding. "If we do this," Rachel said carefully, "if we let you into our lives, it has to be real. Chloe can't handle another abandonment. I can't handle watching her go through that again. It will be real, Ben promised solemnly. I can't undo the years I lost with David, but I can make sure his daughter grows up knowing she has an uncle who loves her unconditionally. Can we start slow? Rachel asked. Maybe you could visit more often. Let us get to know each other properly before we make any big changes. Relief flooded through Ben. Of course, whatever pace feels right for you and Chloe. Chloe, however, had her own ideas. Can we go grocery shopping today? I want to show Uncle Ben my dream refrigerator drawings and see if we can make some of them real. Ben and Rachel exchanged a look over her head. The first moment of shared understanding between two adults who both loved this remarkable child. I think, Ben said carefully, that a small grocery shopping adventure might be exactly the right place to start. An hour later, they stood in the entrance of the largest grocery store in the area. Ben had insisted they take his rental car, and Rachel had sat in thoughtful silence during the drive, occasionally glancing at him as if still trying to reconcile the successful businessman with the teenager in David's photographs. Chloe had chattered non-stop, her excitement barely contained. Now, faced with the reality of unlimited choice, she seemed suddenly overwhelmed. She stood close to Rachel, clutching Mr. Hopscotch and staring wide-eyed at the abundance surrounding them. It's even bigger than in my drawings, she whispered in awe. Ben grabbed a regular-sized cart, mindful of Rachel's earlier comments about taking things slowly. Well then, we'd better make a plan. What's most important for your dream refrigerator? We should probably stick to essentials, Rachel said quietly, her discomfort with the situation evident. I don't want to— Mommy, Chloe interrupted gently. Uncle Ben said we could start making my drawings real. Maybe we could get just a few special things? The hope in her voice was impossible to resist. Rachel looked at Ben, who nodded encouragingly. A few special things sounds perfect, Ben agreed. Chloe, you're the expert here. What goes in your dream refrigerator first? The transformation was gradual but beautiful. Chloe started tentatively, pointing to items she'd only imagined owning. When Ben placed the first item, a bag of perfect Honeycrisp apples, in the cart without hesitation, her confidence grew slightly. Those apples, she said, pointing to the display. Mommy loves apples, but usually we can only get the ones that are on sale. How many should we get? Ben asked seriously. Chloe considered this carefully. Maybe 4. That would last a few days. Ben began loading apples into a bag, but instead of stopping at 4, he kept going until they had 8 perfect apples. Uncle Ben, Chloe whispered, that's a lot of apples. Your mommy deserves a lot of apples, Ben replied simply. As they moved through the store, something shifted in the dynamic between the three of them. Rachel's tension began to ease as she watched her daughter experience abundance carefully and thoughtfully. When Chloe tentatively asked for the fancy yogurt with fruit on the bottom, Rachel didn't object, as Ben added several containers to their cart. Can we really get string cheese? Chloe asked as they approached the dairy section. How much string cheese does a girl need? Ben asked with mock seriousness. Chloe giggled, the sound like music in the fluorescent-lit aisles. Maybe just 1 package. I don't want to be greedy. Ben pretended to consider this gravely, then grabbed 2 packages. Chloe's delighted laughter rang through the store, causing other shoppers to smile at the obvious joy of the small family group. But it was in the cereal aisle that the moment Ben would remember forever occurred. Chloe stood transfixed before the colorful boxes, her small hand reaching out to touch, but not quite daring to grab. What is it, sweetheart? Rachel asked gently. Daddy and I used to look at the cereals with the prizes inside, Chloe said softly, her voice thick with memory. He'd say, someday, princess, someday we'll get the one with the best prize. But someday never came. Ben knelt beside her, his vision blurring with unshed tears. Well, I think someday just arrived. Which one has the best prize? Chloe examined the boxes with the seriousness of a scientist conducting crucial research. Finally, she pointed to a bright box with a cartoon character on the front. That one has a toy car inside. Daddy loved cars. Without hesitation, Ben grabbed the box and placed it in their cart. Then he added one more box with a different prize, explaining, "Now you can have 2 adventures." Chloe threw her arms around his neck, hugging him with all the strength her small body possessed. "I think Daddy would be happy that you're here," she whispered in his ear. "I think he's watching us right now and smiling." As they continued through the store, Ben was careful to balance generosity with Rachel's obvious discomfort about accepting too much. He bought quality versions of staples they needed: milk, bread, eggs, and a few treats that made Chloe's eyes light up. But he stopped short of the overwhelming abundance he could easily afford. By the time they reached the checkout, their cart was well stocked, but not overflowing. The teenage cashier smiled at Chloe's excitement as she helped unload items, chattering about which ones were her favorites. "Your total is $127.43, the cashier announced. Ben handed over his credit card, noting Rachel's visible relief that the amount, while more than she usually spent, wasn't extravagant enough to make her feel like a charity case. "Sir," the cashier said with a friendly smile, "your daughter has excellent taste in cereals. Those are my favorites too." "She's my niece," Ben corrected gently, but the warmth in his voice made it clear that the connection was just as precious to him. As they loaded the groceries into the car, Rachel finally spoke up. "Ben, this is generous, but I need you to understand that we can't expect this kind of help regularly. I have to be able to provide for Chloe myself." "I respect that completely," Ben said sincerely, "but I also hope you'll let me be part of your lives in whatever way feels comfortable. Maybe I could visit once a month? Take Chloe to the park sometimes? Help with school expenses occasionally?" Rachel considered this, her protective instincts warring with the obvious joy on her daughter's face. "We could try that," she said carefully. "See how it goes." That evening, back at the house, they worked together to put away the groceries. The small refrigerator that had looked so sparse the day before was now comfortably full without being crammed. Chloe stood before the open refrigerator door, her face glowing with quiet satisfaction. "It looks like my drawing," she said softly. "Not exactly, but like it's getting better." Ben watched her from across the kitchen, his heart full, but his mind already working on long-term solutions. This was just the beginning. Over time, he could help them move to a better neighborhood, ensure Chloe had opportunities David would have wanted for her, and provide Rachel with the security she'd been fighting so hard to create on her own. "Uncle Ben?" Chloe said, turning away from the refrigerator to look at him seriously. "Will you come back soon?" "As soon as your mommy says it's okay," he promised. Rachel smiled, her earlier wariness softening. "How about next weekend? You could take Chloe to that new art museum downtown. She's been wanting to see it, but the admission is expensive," Ben finished. "I'd love to take her. We could make a whole day of it." As Rachel tucked Chloe into bed that night, Ben stood in the doorway, listening to their evening routine. When Rachel finished reading the bedtime story, Chloe had a request. "Can we do the Star Wish tonight with Uncle Ben?" Rachel explained the tradition as they moved to the window where the first star of the evening was just becoming visible in the darkening sky. "What do you wish for tonight, Chloe?" Ben asked gently. Chloe was quiet for a moment, her small face serious with concentration. Finally she spoke, her voice filled with careful hope. "I wish for Daddy to know that little Ben found us and that he's going to visit us and take us on adventures. And I wish for our refrigerator to stay full like it is now. And—" she paused, glancing at her mother. "And I wish for Uncle Ben to be happy too, because I think he was sad for a long time. Ben had to look away to compose himself. When he looked back, Rachel was watching him with understanding in her eyes. "I think," she said softly, "that wish is already coming true." As Ben drove back to his motel that night, he felt something he hadn't experienced since childhood. The absolute certainty that he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. Tomorrow, he would start the process of relocating his business gradually, arranging to spend more time in Ohio. He'd hire the best lawyers to explore legal guardianship options just in case something happened to Rachel. He'd set up education funds and make sure Chloe's future was secure. But tonight, he simply smiled at the memory of a little girl's joy over string cheese and cereal prizes, and the way his brother's daughter had called him Uncle Ben with such natural affection. David's family was no longer alone, and Ben finally understood what success really meant. 6 months later, Ben stood in the kitchen of a comfortable suburban home just outside Columbus, watching Chloe carefully arrange fresh fruit in a bowl, a task she'd assigned herself every morning since they'd moved into the house he'd purchased for them. The kitchen was spacious and bright, with a large refrigerator that stayed comfortably full and a breakfast nook where they shared meals together whenever Ben was in town. The transition had been gradual and carefully managed. Ben had spent every weekend in Ohio for 2 months, building trust and understanding with both Rachel and Chloe. When he'd finally suggested relocating his main offices to Columbus and helping them move to a better neighborhood, Rachel had been ready to consider it. The house he'd found was lovely, but not ostentatious. A 4-bedroom home with a good school district and a yard where Chloe could play safely. "Good morning, sweetheart," Ben said, ruffling Chloe's hair as she concentrated on arranging the fruit. "Morning, Uncle Ben," she chirped, beaming up at him. "Look, I made the oranges and apples into a pattern." Rachel appeared in the doorway, dressed professionally in a tailored suit. Ben had quietly paid for her to return to school to finish her social work degree, and today was her first day at her new job with the County Family Services Department. "You look beautiful, Mom," Chloe said, using the word that had evolved naturally as she'd grown more confident in their stable new life. "Thank you, sweetheart. Are you sure you'll be okay with Uncle Ben today?" It was a question that had become part of their morning routine, though the anxiety behind it had largely faded. "We're going to have the best day," Ben promised. "First, we're meeting the contractor about the art studio addition. Then art class, then lunch at that place with the really good grilled cheese, and then we're cooking dinner together for when you get home." The art studio was Ben's latest project, converting the spare bedroom into a space specifically designed for Chloe's creativity. It would have perfect lighting, proper easels, and every art supply a young artist could desire. But most importantly, it would have a special wall where she could create murals, not because they couldn't afford proper wall coverings, but because her art deserved to be celebrated and displayed. "Can I tell Mum about the special thing we're making for the studio?" Chloe asked, practically bouncing with excitement. Ben grinned. "Go ahead." Chloe ran to Rachel and grabbed her hands, her blue eyes sparkling with the enthusiasm that had replaced the careful wariness she'd once shown. "Uncle Ben is helping me make a really big painting to hang in the studio. It's going to be a picture of our whole family. Me and you and Uncle Ben and Daddy watching from heaven." Rachel's eyes misted over. "That sounds perfect, sweetheart." After Rachel left for work, Ben and Chloe spent the morning with the contractor discussing plans for the art studio. Chloe had opinions about everything from the color of the walls, sunshine yellow like happiness, to the placement of the supply cabinets, low enough that I can reach everything myself. And Ben marveled at how confident she'd become in expressing her preferences. The transformation in her had been remarkable but gradual. The tentative, careful child who had once rationed her food had become a vibrant, curious girl who approached each day with enthusiasm and security. She still treasured Mr. Hopscotch and still helped other children who seemed lonely at her new school. But the underlying anxiety about scarcity had faded completely. "Uncle Ben," she said as they walked through the park after her art class, "can I ask you something important?" "Always," Ben replied, taking her small hand in his. "Do you think Daddy knows how happy we are now?" It was a question she asked regularly, and Ben had learned that she needed ongoing reassurance about this connection to her father. "I think your daddy sees everything wonderful about your life," Ben said seriously. "I think he's proud of how beautifully you're growing up, how hard your mom is working to help other families, and how much joy you bring to everyone around you." Chloe nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes I dream about him, and in the dreams he's not sad anymore. He's smiling really big, and he says, 'Thank you for taking care of my girls, little Ben.'" Ben's throat tightened. "What else does he say?" "He says he's not worried anymore because he knows we're safe and loved." She paused, then added with characteristic honesty, "And sometimes Dream Daddy gives me new ideas for paintings." That afternoon, they visited the cemetery where David was buried. Ben had arranged for a beautiful headstone to replace the simple marker Rachel had been able to afford, and they'd planted flowers that bloomed in rotation throughout the growing season. Chloe chatted as they walked toward the grave, updating her father on her new school, her art teacher, who said she had exceptional talent for someone her age, and the friend she'd made who lived 3 houses down from them. When they reached the grave, Chloe carefully placed the drawing she'd brought, a picture of their new house with all 3 of them standing in front of it, holding hands. "Look, Daddy," she said softly. "This is our new house. It has a big kitchen with 2 refrigerators, and my room has windows on 2 sides, so I get lots of good light for drawing. And Uncle Ben is going to live in the guest house in the backyard, so he can be close, but we still have our own space." Ben knelt beside the grave, as had become his custom during these visits. "David," he said quietly, "I want you to know that your daughter is the most remarkable person I've ever met. She has your creativity, your generous heart, and your ability to find hope in any situation. Rachel has raised her with so much love that Chloe never doubted she was precious, even in the hardest times." He paused, then added, "I know I can't undo the years we lost, but I promise you that your girls will never want for anything. Not material things, but love, security, and the knowledge that family means everything." Chloe slipped her small hand into his. "Uncle Ben, I think Daddy heard you. I can feel him smiling." That evening, as Rachel shared stories about her first day at work and Chloe showed off the painting she'd started that afternoon, Ben looked around their dinner table and marveled at the miracle they'd created together. The empty penthouse in Manhattan sat largely unused now. This warm, laughter-filled home in Ohio had become the center of his universe. "Uncle Ben," Chloe said suddenly, pausing in her detailed description of her art teacher's technique lesson, "I want to show you something." She pulled out her latest creation, a family portrait showing 3 figures holding hands in front of their new house. The figures were more sophisticated than her early stick drawings, showing the artistic progress she'd made over the past months. "I don't draw empty refrigerators anymore," she announced proudly. "Now I draw families. Happy families with people who love each other and never leave." She'd written carefully at the bottom, "My forever family." Ben studied the drawing with the attention it deserved, noting every detail she'd included. The art studio addition under construction, Rachel's car in the driveway, even Mr. Hopscotch visible in the window of her bedroom. "It's the most beautiful picture I've ever seen," he said honestly. "Should we frame it for the art studio?" "Yes," Chloe beamed, "and I'm going to make lots more. I want to fill up the whole studio with pictures of all our adventures together." So later that night, after Chloe had been tucked into her new bedroom, spacious and bright, with built-in shelves for her growing collection of art supplies, Ben and Rachel sat on the back porch, watching fireflies dance in the garden. "Do you ever miss it?" Rachel asked quietly. "Your old life in New York, all that corporate success?" Ben considered the question seriously. "I miss the excitement of closing deals sometimes, but I've learned that success without family to share it with is just expensive loneliness. This," he gestured toward the house where Chloe slept safely, "this is what David wanted for his daughter. A stable home, opportunities to grow, and people who love her unconditionally." Rachel smiled. "He would be so proud of the man you've become, and so grateful that Chloe has an uncle who understands that love is more important than money." "Love and money aren't mutually exclusive," Ben replied gently. "David worked himself to death trying to provide for you both with love alone. I can provide the financial security so you can focus on giving Chloe what money can't buy: time, attention, and the confidence that comes from being someone's whole world." As they sat in comfortable silence, Ben reflected on the journey that had brought them all together. A little girl's drawing of a full refrigerator had led him to discover that the greatest abundance wasn't measured in bank accounts or business achievements, but in the daily privilege of being trusted with a child's heart and future. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, art classes and park visits, bedtime stories and star wishes. The guardianship papers were moving through the legal system, ensuring that if anything happened to Rachel, Chloe would never be alone again. The education fund he'd established would give her choices David could never have imagined. But tonight, Ben simply smiled as he listened to the quiet sounds of a house filled with family. Rachel washing dishes in the kitchen, Chloe talking softly to Mr. Hopscotch as she settled into sleep, the gentle night sounds of a neighborhood where children played safely and families thrived. Chloe would never again need to draw her dreams on bedroom walls, because her real life had become more wonderful than any picture she could imagine. And Ben would never again wonder what David's daughter was like, because she was sleeping safely under his protection, surrounded by love and infinite possibilities. The little brother had finally come home to family, and every refrigerator in their lives, literal and metaphorical, would always be full. In her room, Chloe slept peacefully, dreaming not of empty spaces that needed to be filled, but of art studios and family dinners and the kind of security that comes from knowing you are deeply, permanently loved. Some dreams, Ben had learned, were too precious to keep on bedroom walls. The best dreams demanded to become reality, one careful, loving step at a time.